National Wizard of Oz Club for more than 50 years. Today, I wanted to interview my friend, Nate Barlow. He and I have known each other since he was a teenager, and now his oldest daughter is a teenager. Nate is a film producer in Hollywood. He worked on a couple particular pieces of animation for the recent OzCon International. I saw them there and thought it would be fun to share them on the Oz Club's channel. So with that, Nate, tell me a little bit about these animation projects.
I was asked to chair OzCon this past year, and the theme coming in was animation, even when I first signed up. So I worked with the theme that I was given, and so of course I was searching out various interesting pieces. Magic I knew about and had seen at some point in the past, but someone told me about that Lisbeth, one of our members, had this pitch book for an unproduced cartoon in the 1930s. And so I talked to Lee and said, I'm not sure to what extent, we might actually be able, I'd love to have this in the program somehow. What we can do, because I hadn't seen it at that point, I wasn't sure. So he said, yeah, let's meet up. You can scan the pitch book. So we met up at a coffee shop in Pasadena, and I had to bring my scanner to Pasadena, and he brought the pitch book, The Land of Oz, a Ken McCellan cartoon. And so Ken McCellan was an independent animator. He had previously worked for Disney, and did on IMDb, his credits are thin, but credits at those times on films were not necessarily detailed like they are today. Not everybody got their just due, only the leads. And so there's only one film that he did for Fox that's listed on there, but it was a sequence that Disney had done for Fox. So the one thing that he's listed for is this one sequence there. But what happened was when he went independent, got in touch with Maud Baum and acquired the rights to do a series of cartoons for based on the Oz books. And Maud was not exactly a Disney fan, as well known. So she was glad to work with him. Now, he said he had financing, and maybe he did have financing at one point, but the financing dropped out, if it did exist ever. And when he was, and so all that was ever, I shouldn't say that all was ever created. He may have done other work. He said he had some new kind of interesting stop motion process at some point, but all that remains of whatever he did was this one pitch book, which miraculously landed in Lee's hands.
What year was this? Do we have an idea?
1937. 1937. So, I mean, probably the project was floating for a couple, who knows? That's when it's what the little bit that we know about it was then, but many of these things are developed over years. So
it would have followed the Ted Eschbach cartoon, but preceded the MGM film.
Yes.
Okay.
So, Frank Jocelyn was involved with getting the Eschbach deal. And of course, that had ran into its own issues. Interestingly enough, Disney, because Disney had locked up the rights to 3-strip Technicolor at that time, at least for animation projects. And Eschbach shot in that and then couldn't release it in color. But only on the animation, because obviously we all know MGM and so many other great MGM films, were 3-strip. So it was in between those phrases, and also specifically in difference, I think, to MGM, it was animated. I'm not sure I haven't seen the actual contract, but my understanding is that it was for animation, which would, of course, any deals, because there had been several live action were still on the table, which allowed MGM to do their own arrangement. So.
And so you have the scans, you have the pitch book. Was this sort of a artificial intelligence animation project, or how did you animate these stills?
Well, I got the stuff, and of course, I had no idea what the pitch book was going to be. And so at bare minimum, I thought, well, it's a pitch book. I can at least just sequence them, if nothing else, right? But for those, haven't seen it yet and about to, the book had a rough scenario for the first piece they were going to do. It had character sketches, a body with faces, different expressions on the side, And then there were scenes, actual, full, mock-ups of what, a particular scene would look like. So what I did, I used a variety of animation techniques. And while I'm a film producer, I am not an animator per se, although interestingly, my most recent, a short I recently directed by its nature was computer generated animation, because it literally could not have been done in any other way. My wife is actually in animation. She's she's an animation executive at Paramount. So I used kind of a couple different things depending on the situation, what I wanted to do. One of the things I did was took each of the character sketches in their heads. So I start wide, and then I push in so you can see them a bit more, and then I would have the expressions change. And that I used a very modern technique, something inside Premiere called Morph Cut, which is really designed for documentary type stuff, where you're cutting out a little bit of dialogue and you just got this little jump in movement and smooths it out, cutting out an or something like that. But it worked really, it works on the principles of morph software. So it just shifted the face and shifted the expression. So it did all these kind of very smooth transitions like that. Sometimes I use that on some of the body work too, in the stills, sometimes not.
Well, why don't we take a break then, and I'll share screen and we'll watch this animation.
Sounds great.
The story opens on a rural scene in a rather indefinite country. It is very hot and dry and uninteresting. The background music somewhat reminiscent of Dawn from the Peer Gynt suite. Dorothy skips happily into the scene. She is followed by her dog Toto, who is barking and generally very busy. We establish a very close companionship between the two. A wind begins blowing rather gently at first and then increases in velocity. The tempo and general feeling of the background music changes to a somewhat ominous note. The music increases in volume and tempo as the wind increases. Dorothy and Toto have difficulty in keeping their balance. The scene dims. With a crescendo and a crash of cymbals, the music stops, and the scene is completely faded. There is silence for 24 frames. A harp is then heard running up the scale in a very tuneful bell-like air. As the harp ascends the scale, the scene fades into view, but instead of the flat, dry, barren country, Dorothy and Toto find themselves in a new land. The scene is green and lush and beautiful. Birds are singing and colorful flowers are in bloom. Dorothy is rather alarmed at the sudden change. She walks along very carefully, not knowing what to expect. Her attention is diverted by a bee who flies up and lands on a bush of Canterbury bells. He whistles and is joined by 7 other bees. Each bee lands on a Canterbury bell. The bees ring the bells, C, E, G, C, and as each note is struck, fuchsias on a nearby bush come to life. The bees play C, G, E, C, and 4 fuchsias drop to the ground. Then a very sour note is struck and a 5th fuchsia drops, landing on her fanny. The bees start playing Dance of the Hours from La Gioconda, and the fuchsias start a ballet dance. The 5th fuchsia, being unable to take part in the proceedings, does a dance of her own, furnishing comedy relief to what might otherwise be a too sweet scene. Dorothy is completely entranced by the dancing. Toto starts to sniff, and she tells him to be quiet. Once again we see the fuchsia ballet, a very colorful rhythmic number. The little comedy fuchsia is also doing her stuff. Dorothy tells Toto to be quiet. Toto gets rather fed up on the dancing and walks away. A large lion comes into the scene and takes the place that was formerly occupied by Toto. He too sniffs. Dorothy puts her hand back to touch what she thinks is Toto. Her hand touches the lion's head. The expression on Dorothy's face at the feel of the long mane. She is a little afraid to look, but finally turns to see the lion, who lets out a roar. Dorothy loses no time in getting underway. The lion takes after her. Dorothy screams. Toto hears and comes running to see what the trouble is. When he sees the lion, he changes his mind and runs with Dorothy. Dorothy and Toto, with the lion in hot pursuit, pass a scarecrow that is perched upon a stick. The chase continues and once again they come by the scarecrow. This time the lion hits the stick and knocks the scarecrow into the air. The Scarecrow comes down on the lion's back. They pass under a tree with a low-hanging limb. The Scarecrow grabs the limb and swings off the lion's back, but he comes apart, and while the upper torso is swinging from the tree, the lower torso and legs are still riding the lion. The chase continues, and once again they come by the tree. The Scarecrow whistles for his legs. They jump off the lion's back and come running up to the Scarecrow, who lets go of the limb and lands on his legs, but instead of landing properly, he is wrong way about. The legs seem to have gotten into the spirit of the chase and take after the lion. The Scarecrow is merely riding. He catches up to the lion and makes a grab for its neck. Once again he pulls himself apart. This time the upper torso hangs on to the lion while the legs are running after him. The Scarecrow again whistles for his legs and they come running after him. Not being able to see where they are going, the legs come up behind the lion and start booting him in the fanny. This makes the lion run all the faster, much to the discomfiture of the Scarecrow. The Tin Woodman of Oz comes into the scene riding his wooden sawhorse. He takes in the situation and starts after the lion with a lariat. He does some very fancy riding and rope work. The Scarecrow's legs feel that the competition is getting a bit too stiff and decides to sit this one out. The legs sit down on a log and let the rest run by themselves. Just as Dorothy and Toto feel that legs will carry them no farther, the Tin Woodman succeeds in roping the lion. In his previous tries, he has roped the Scarecrow and pulled him off the lion's back. Dorothy is so frightened that she climbs a tree. The woman asks the lion what it means by trying to frighten a little girl who is obviously a stranger in their country. The lion is very much hurt to think that anyone would not trust him, and he says that he only wanted to play. When friendly relations are established, they all join in repairing the Scarecrow. Dorothy climbs on the lion's back, and they all walk happily out of the scene.
So one of the things you'll see in there is, of course, there are some places where there's just the flat still, and there are others which I animated the sequence. And I had to make choices based on how complete what was in the pitch book, how much I could actually, where I could use pieces versus and actually do something with it and put it together, and how much where there was nothing related to it that I had to use and just could put up the single still over reading the narration. And so of course the most complete sequence is the tornado, the cyclone, and it's because there was the most detailed pieces there. I had to I first had to go into Photoshop and isolate elements, which of course would have, if you were doing this in a more traditional form, you would have had separate elements. I had to go break up the pieces, and really I used a very traditional kind of style technique, though done digitally, where you reuse the same 2-up, it's called, or 4-up, and depending how many times pieces you reuse. It's really the same couple frames repeated, and just for different amounts of time, and alternating between them and moving them across the screen. So I had to take her body like this, and then I'd have to cut off the arms and legs and move them around and move the head, put on different, tweak the hair just so there's enough movement throughout the section for the next piece. And then I would jump to and from and back and forth. And then, so that was how she would get her walking effect. And then she and Toto and the leaves, all those things are just, well, she and Toto were basically moving in largely a straight line, just pushing them across the screen. Even, you see in any kind of just basic movement, having to create whole paths for each individual leaf, making them different speeds. And then going into the full-blown storm, there's a lot of rendered Photoshop generated layers that have they were just completely generated with taking particles and stretching them so that, and then sliding those so that it gives that rain effect.
Well, it's a wonderful job. I really felt like I could imagine what this was like. Now, what jumps out at me is suddenly there's the Patchwork Girl, which makes you wonder if there isn't a pitch book out there somewhere waiting to be discovered of what he might have done with the Patchwork Girl of Oz. And the sawhorse coming in, before we describe him as the Tin Woodman sawhorse, I thought that was kind of a fun note. Loved the saddle on the sawhorse. He looked very Neil-like. The Scarecrow, I thought, looked very Denslow-like.
Yes, definitely more Denzo-like, or Denzo-like, and even a little of all the characters. I think he looks most like the Eshbaugh stuff from a few years back. So then who knows if he had seen some of that and there may have been some influence there too. Of course, that's also very much the animation style at that time, that kind of curvy, so who knows how much that was coming in.
And I take it that you pulled the music together.
I found some royalty-free tracks to put in on over that fit the time. So,
yeah, seems like a great job.
Thank you.
Well, of that whole weekend of OzCon, the things I walked away with were these two pieces and the Tin Woods short premiere. So it was just really outstanding to me and memorable. Let's shift gears and tell me about this magic cartoon, once described as the worst cartoon ever made.
Well, yeah, I think basically disappeared off the radar for 40 something years, and I guess was shown, I think it was at San Diego Comic-Con first, where it had been rediscovered, and introduced as one of the worst animation of all time, which is it's not great, but that's kind of harsh, I think. There's some pretty abysmal stuff out there. It may have been also negatively affected. Excuse me, I need to blow my nose.
That's it. Had it been held in a private collection somewhere and someone just finally found it and resurfaced it?
I don't know. No one seems to know even where it reappeared from. I mean, just someone found it. And I think it was probably based on the quality of the stuff flying out there, probably on someone just stumbled on an old videotape, because it does not look like it's a fresh film transfer. I've read some theories that it was produced for television, which might explain why it's in that black and white. If there was a black and white videotape, even if it was originally shot in color, that could easily be.
We can go ahead and give it a watch.
Great Wizard of Oz sees all, knows all. What kind of a welcome can he be preparing for Dorothy and her friends? Better turn back, Dorothy, before it's too late. Let's go and see. When will you learn to be a real Russian? Oh, I'm not cut out for a lion's life. I just concerned to do terrible things a lion does when he isn't in a zoo. And all the time I'm scared to death. Just look at the state I'm in. I'm just a little brady cat inside a lion's skin. Oh, I don't want to be the king of bees. I'd rather be a mouse with a hole in the wall, away from it all, in the snugly little cozy little house. I'd rather be a mouse A mouse. A mouse. A mouse.
Come on, Leo, you mustn't give up so easily. Try once more.
It's no use, but I'll try.
Magnificent, Leo. Now, go for that antelope.
Oh, 3 against 1. I'd better get out of here. Ouch! My poor claws. I'll never be able to use them again.
You wicked lion, you! It serves you right. A big beast like you, knocking down a straw man.
I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I'm really a fraidy cat.
You can't be a real lion without courage, my friend.
Perhaps the Wizard of Oz can give you courage. Why not join us?
May I? Really?
A wonder-working wizard in the land of Oz. A wonderful wizard, a wise old witch. You'll never find another like old Ozzy. A wonderful wizard is Oz. The best that ever there was. If you think it's not so hey, what's the best your mama's a Oz? If you think it's not so hey, what's the best your mama's a Oz?
You give a break to me, a lion's courage to be.
A heart of gold is a wood and bone.
And a fifth back home to she.
A wonderful wizard is Oz. The best that ever there was. If you think it's not, we'll tell you what's the best your mama can tell about the wonderful wizard of Oz. About the wonderful wizard of Oz.
You can tell from a lot of the artifacts, it was definitely initially shot on film, but it looks like it was transferred off of a poor videotape. So it probably just stumbled into someone's collection like, what is this? And as difficult as the quality is, I had to work to get it up to that level. Because this was just ripped off of YouTube. The first half of the original copy up there got static over everything. So I had to run audio filters to clean that up to the point you could even hear it and boost the volume of what was there. And then it was also extremely dark. So I had to boost all the dark regions so you can get any of the details in there. And a lot of post-processing to even get it to that level of watchable.
It's interesting to me to see that it's so clearly one scene from The Wizard of Oz, Discovery of the Cowardly Lion, although they've left Toto out and he goes after the Scarecrow. The Tin Man squirting oil in his face. Where did that come from?
I like that.
Here's Dorothy just happens to have a needle and thread on her to stop and mend the Scarecrow as he's lying on the ground. It's a strange little creature. It'll be so fun if any more scenes from it ever resurface.
Yeah, being that weird random scene, it does make you wonder if it could have been part of a sequel. Probably the first one, then maybe as a proof of concept for things. And it was going to be a bunch of short pieces that and shot that way as interstitials or whatever. But it never did well enough on that first one. I actually think I like the Tim Woodman's and the Lion's characters design, but Dorothy looks very bland, and the Scarecrow's eyes, it's very uneven in that guard. Because I think the Tim Woodman actually looks quite nice.
The Tin Woodman having his mouth open in what I think of as sort of under his chin, versus where Neil and Denslow had it open, up on the flat of his face was an unusual design choice. And you're right, the facial expressions on Dorothy are just bizarre. It's very amateurish compared to other parts of the whole piece.
Yeah, it's it feels like a kind of a proof of concept kind of deal that just didn't take off, and there's just no information on it. Said Paul Zonka at least has some other, he's the one person of the listed names who has anything of like a resume that you can uncover, and the producer has a couple other things. Interestingly enough, on IMDb he has a few other fantasy shorts, but all live action. And then he did a feature which had 4 miniature opera adaptations in it. So he had definitely, there was an area he was targeting, but that's all. And it's just, there's just nothing else about it. And even the name Cartoon Films could not be, for the production company, is about as useless as you could possibly have, because, well, try to search anything up like that, it's just bland.
Completely generic name.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate all the work you did, of course, on the McCellan piece, and that you shared both of these, first at OzCon and now with us on the Oz Club's channel.
Glad to do so.